Overlord. Volume 16, Chapter 5. Kill Steal, Part 2B. Scary. Upon hearing Mari's trembling voice echoing through the necklace, Aura immediately concurred. Scary. So Insama can be this scary. Aura and Mari understood well why their master was intentionally fighting like that. To gauge his opponent, that was probably one of his aims, but that was not the only one. He was aiming for one other major objective. He was slowly dragging the opponent down like quicksand to stop him from escaping and would then go in for the kill. When should someone choose to escape in a situation where they couldn't get a read on the other party's health? There were various opinions on this topic, but excluding cases like their attacks being completely ineffective on the opponent, it would be when their own health went below a certain threshold. Then, what if their health mostly remained the same, but it was their mana that was getting worn down? What if they already used a lot of their mana up till that point? What if they felt like they could win with just one more push? It was in everyone's nature to be reluctant to cut their losses even when they knew that was the right thing to do. That was why everyone made their own rules from their own painful experiences and the information they had gained from others. That meant that when one's battle experience was meager and the information they had on their opponent was nearly non-existent, they would have trouble deciding on the right moment to cut their losses. Their master saw through that very point. Especially since the opponent was a king, someone haughty and inexperienced at battling others whose strength was on par with himself. He was pushing him to a point where he couldn't easily cut his losses and escape. All of those shameful utterances were a bluff. Although it's rude to call him a monster, Insama really is one when it comes to a battle of wits, isn't he? Aura's body slightly trembled. It's understandable why Demiurge-san said that he is someone above even him. Mari also trembled in sync. It's also awesome how he is deliberately showing the guy that he is using the scrolls. All because he is trying to hide his own strength. They couldn't help but feel fear at the deliberate actions he had taken. They also learned a lot at the same time. Both of them felt how blessed they were to have one such as him standing above them. A new wall appeared the very instant the previous one was smashed apart. DCM hid his irritation behind a smile, realizing that the opponent was uselessly stalling for time. He wondered how many times they had repeated this. Though he didn't count because it was tiresome, it should be at least 20 times by now. The walls were weak enough to break apart in a single hit, but the opponent was deploying multiple at a time to avoid Behemoth's blows. Mooks will use their brains in their own way. No, it's different. Maybe I should say that they need to be so desperate because they can only use such weak magic. It was probably incorrect to call him a Mook, but that undead was certainly weaker than his Behemoth. What DCM saw till now in this fight showed that he was right. If that undead was stronger than Behemoth, he would have proactively attacked them. However, all he did was fumble around while doing his best to defend against Behemoth with spells. It was like he was relying on some third party to do the real work. Sure, Behemoth was taking damage every time he broke one of the walls, but that was trivial. It was unlikely that the undead was stupid enough to think that he could take down Behemoth with that alone. His attempt to damage Behemoth bit by bit was probably a ploy to help the humans who he's expecting to come here later. Brings tears to my eyes, really. Behemoth's got far more health than you think, you know? Won't your mana run out first? Another wall was smashed and he can see the next one behind it. DCM sighed. Continuing with this farce any longer would be tiresome. Maybe that was his aim all along. To make me just leave them alone because it felt tiresome. How do I quickly deal with him? He already understood that it was not wise to deal with those walls one by one, but Behemoth unfortunately didn't have any special skills. If he wanted to ignore the walls, the only other choice was to walk around them. If he did that though, the enemy would just make another wall. It would end up being a game of cat and mouse. DCM could control and order elementals stronger than him. Generally, it would be impossible to summon or control those stronger than yourself. But due to one of the classes DCM had, he could ignore that restriction. However, it came with the price that his mana would be gradually consumed while the summon was fighting. It was not like he had to concentrate while using Behemoth, so DCM could use magic at the same time. Although, doing that would reduce the time he could keep Behemoth active. It can't be helped. Should I just use an attack spell? Behemoth and me. He shouldn't have any leeway to create new walls while taking on both of our attacks. DCM could use 10th tier magic. A realm that the magic casters of this world could never reach even with all of their efforts, a tier only allowed for the chosen few. That said, he could only barely use it because he had specialized in summoning. He was certainly not good at it, though it should be enough to deal with something like that undead easily. But was it fine to use his precious mana like that? He hesitated, wondering if he should save it for Behemoth instead. I have to somehow make that undead understand that humans can't do anything to me. That would probably make him stop trying to buy time. He already said as much, but it didn't look like the other side believed him. No, even he could understand that it was only natural that they wouldn't believe him. One does not simply believe the enemy's words, but it's not like DCM was lying either. No one was able to beat Behemoth till now, even the ancient dragons weren't a match. Though they used second-tier magic to strengthen their bodies, they were still beaten into a pulp by Behemoth in the end. Even DCM himself would inevitably die if he turned Behemoth into his opponent. His father was probably the only one who could defeat Behemoth, but he was already dead. That meant that there was no one left who could. He's probably thinking that he can win if I exhaust my mana, but that's wrong too. The undead was likely counting on taking down a magic caster whose mana was exhausted easily. That was probably a prediction made from his own experience as a magic caster. DCM deigned to recognize that a part of its reasoning was correct. If DCM, someone who specialized in summoning, used up all of his mana and was unable to use Behemoth anymore, his battle strength would drastically drop. However, that didn't mean that he himself was weak. As someone who stood at the pinnacle of druids, his body was stronger than most living beings. The brittle human body would split into two with just a single blow from his fist. If he kicked someone who wore armor, it would leave a footprint on it while turning the soft meat inside into pulp from the impact. He was confident that he could wipe out a human army of thousands, nay, tens of thousands with just his bodily strength alone. Yet, if he was asked if it was all right to exhaust his mana, he couldn't be so sure. He was a bit uneasy about it as he entrusted most of his battles to Behemoth till now. Killing a few thousand soldiers would mean that he would need to swing his fists thousands of times as well. He wouldn't know if his stamina would hold unless he tried, and most of all, to fight directly by myself, to do an act as barbaric as dirtying this body with human blood, is unthinkable. As someone proud of his nature as an elemental user, to swing a weapon at his opponent personally was nothing but savagery to him. He wanted to avoid that kind of battle at all costs. What should he do then? I already consumed a lot of mana. I can still fight, but that doesn't mean I can do it for long using Behemoth. I will have to kill humans while keeping the grandchildren bound with magic. Taking that into account, I really don't have much leeway with my mana. He couldn't spend any more mana on that undead. Should I just ignore him and leave with the grandchildren? But he will probably just be summoned again. Then they would end up going through a similar fight again. That's not the way he wanted to do this at all. He wanted to break their will by showing them who was the stronger one. He wanted to win the battle here and imprint on them that he was their superior. Those two would continue to rebel against him if he didn't do that. So that undead had to be destroyed completely. It all comes back to this, but how should I eliminate him? All of his opponents till now were no more than brittle branches that broke with a single punch from Behemoth. He never imagined a battle where he had to chase after the opponent who scurried here and there, trying to stall for time. And this was a good experience. I should practice by killing those escaping worms as well the next time around. First, I should deal with that. DCM glared at the wall standing in Behemoth's way. Or, to be more precise, he was staring at the undead behind it. As I thought, there's no way around it. I should quickly kill him even if I have to use a large amount of mana. It's extremely, yes, extremely inelegant that an elemental user like me has to use attack magic, but it can't be helped. I don't want to fight physically, so let's just bear with it. After resolving himself to it, DCM selected a spell and activated it. Shining Burst. The 7th tier spell caused an eruption of heat and light which manifested like the sun. The wall made of bones was blown away the instant the hemisphere of white light touched it, but the walls behind it stood undamaged. I see, so even a wide area spell can't break through the inner walls. It would have been better for him if all the walls were dealt with at once, but finding out one of its characteristics was good enough. He would just have to choose a different spell next time with that information in mind. Even wide area spells differed slightly, some scattered and some exploded, while others radiated outwards. Behemoth's huge right fist of stone smashed through another wall, and without a pause, his left fist also brought the last wall down. He finally caught the sight of the undead, who looked flustered. He will just make another wall, won't he? Then all he had to do was cast a more suitable spell based on the now known information. But what happened next was unexpected. The undead started to walk away in an attempt to create some distance from Behemoth, and took an item out from under his robe. It was probably another scroll. The elves used the bark from a special kind of tree to make scrolls and could only inscribe druid spells up to the 3rd tier on them. That undead's magic was not druidic, so DCM thought that was probably how scrolls looked for spells from a different system of magic. A low-tier spell? Is he mocking me? Does he think he can defend with just that? Or do the scrolls he uses contain higher-tier spells? But when did he even get them? A special type of summon. The undead burned the scroll, activating the spell stored. Wah! A dense fog spread out with the undead at its center, covering DCM's entire field of vision, reducing his visibility to only a few meters. The fog was so milky thick that he could only look ahead by maybe 5 meters at most. More irritating magic from his opponent. He was about to cast an attack spell, but it wouldn't be effective unless he had a clear line of sight. It was the same for wide area magic. That undead used the scroll while walking, so he should be moving right now. It was possible that the target was not in range even if he attacked the spot he last saw him. DCM commanded Behemoth to search for the undead, but realized that its movement was dull. Behemoth's senses relied on its eyes, so it couldn't find the enemy because of the fog. If that's how it is going to be, DCM thought. He cast the 4th tier spell, Tremor Sense. This spell allowed him to sense even the smallest amount of tremors, allowing him to find his opponent's position. It was more effective on land, but a floor should work as well. But what? He is nowhere around, you say? Tremor Sense told him that the 2 grandchildren were still here even though he couldn't see them through the fog. The tremors were probably caused by them changing their postures. It was hard to think that the undead would escape by teleportation, thus leaving them behind. It was even harder to believe that the summon was cancelled. Then, what happened? DCM soon stumbled upon the reason. He is not touching the floor. He is floating in the air. He didn't realize it because the enemy previously only used his legs to run when he tried to escape, but he had to be floating through some means. Tremor Sense could sense even the most trivial of vibrations from the floor, but its range did not extend to air. The undead was doing a splendid job at getting on his nerves. Such attempts at stalling for time are meaningless. You irritating mook. This was starting to get really unpleasant. Maybe he should just call the humans over and wipe them out together. It would probably be quicker than this. This weakling. He would have been dead already if we had been fighting outside. He couldn't immediately think of a way to drag the children and the undead outside. He could blast the wall and push them outside, but he doubted that it would go as expected. DCM hurled an order at the behemoth who was stumbling aimlessly and made him stand by his side. He was not sure about the guy's movements inside the fog, but it was possible that the undead was targeting him. That wasn't something he had to worry about as he wouldn't die in a single hit, but he didn't really want his blood spilled again by such a lowly being. Time slowly passed by as he tried to sense the enemy's movements. It hadn't been that long since, but the sensation of his mana gradually going down made him feel like time flowed slower than usual. I can't waste any more time. He would just blow the fog away. DCM tried to remember the spells he hadn't used for a long time. As Behemoth had mowed down all of his enemies up till this point, there were a lot of spells he hadn't used after learning them. He knew at least one spell that could blow this fog away. He chose a 9th tier spell, Tempest. A storm started rampaging, clearing the fog in an instant. However, the fierce rain that came along with it obscured their vision again. The swirling winds were ferocious, strong enough that even DCM had to spend his full effort just to stay put. It was extremely difficult to move amidst this. As expected, only Behemoth with its huge body could withstand the raging winds enough to move around even though its speed would go down. That guy shouldn't be able to move in the middle of this storm either. Nothing was visible inside this downpour, even Behemoth couldn't find that undead amidst this. But, it was different for DCM. Tremor sense would pick up the vibrations caused by all of the raindrops falling on the floor, so he couldn't discern between them and the steps made by some entity even if they walked around him. On the contrary, he could sense the spots where the tremors from raindrops were weaker. Inside the image of the flat topography this room made inside his head, he found two such spots where the rain was being obstructed. One was the place where his grandchildren stood, the other one was naturally the undead's location. He is moving. This fierce rain was one in which he couldn't even see before him. Even Behemoth, with all the strength its huge body provided, could barely move around in the ferocious winds. Then, how was that undead moving inside this storm? He should have been caught by the winds even if he tried to fly. DCM was only puzzled for a moment. He immediately dispelled Tempest. The rain and the winds born of magic disappeared like they weren't there in the first place, but the wet floor and his soaked clothes proved that it hadn't been an illusion. DCM swiped away the wet hair that was stuck to his face and saw a wall standing between him and the undead's location. The undead probably made it when the spell was dispelled. "Cut it out, you bastard!" DCM shouted angrily. What was that about fighting fairly? Sneaking behind one wall after another. Such cowardice! Isn't it normal to use tactics in a battle? Please don't ask me such obvious things. I have some questions as well that I would like for you to answer. The undead spoke from behind the wall. He should have ignored it, considering his mana was vanishing by the second, but it sparked his curiosity. That undead's words should contain the ideations of those twins and by relation, their parents behind them. He should listen. What are they? Is it fine to leave the humans alone? It had been some time since we started fighting here. Maybe the elves below are being massacred right now, you know. He was stunned at the somewhat unexpected question, but decided to give an honest answer. He momentarily thought about cancelling Behemoth's combat form, but then it would take some time if he wanted to return Behemoth to its present form again. We were talking about that despicable undead here. Even if they were in the middle of a conversation, he would surely come attacking if he saw a chance. A single hit would be far from fatal, but he wanted to avoid taking one head-on. So DCM decided to continue maintaining Behemoth in combat form even though it would continue to consume his mana. From a certain point of view, it's probably better to save them considering that they could awaken their blood in the later generations like those two, but there are elves elsewhere too. Plus, I have more expectations for those who could escape by themselves. In a gist, there is no need to save those who are weak enough to get killed by something like humans. On to the next question then. I heard there is a hidden treasure of the elves. A hidden treasure of the elves? Are they talking about me? Or is it about this thing here? By this thing, you mean Primal Earth Elemental. Primal Earth Elemental. Of all things, that's what caught your attention? A Primal Earth Elemental is what you've summoned, right? Or is it a different race, an elemental with a different name? Do you call it by a different name? Even though it was fine if the lowly worm died in ignorance, DCM was irritated that he thought Behemoth was just a simple earth elemental or something from a similar race. Considering he also had to educate his grandkids correctly, he had to correct the enemy's misunderstanding here. That's Behemoth. The elemental guardian of the land, Behemoth. Behemoth? So I didn't mishear it. Elemental guardian of the land? Not the great magic beast of the continent? The raid boss? The Behemoth I knew looked a lot different. Who was the one that named it first? You. Someone else, but... Then, who? The questioning tone felt a bit forceful. Why was he interested in that of all things? What's this great magic beast of the continent? He felt like he heard the term raid boss, a strong enemy that required a party to defeat though. This guy or his grandchildren, to be more accurate, maybe they knew some things not even he knew about. It would be better to not answer the undead's questions anymore. How about taking down that wall if you want me to answer? Isn't it rude to talk without even being able to see each other's faces? Then it's fine if you don't answer. I only asked that question out of intellectual curiosity. Was it the undead who wanted the information, or was it the grandchildren who somehow got their hands on some information and wanted to know more? The two kids who were drenched from the rain had blank expressions, so DCM couldn't read anything from them. And another question. That's enough. There's no longer any reason for me to continue talking with you. Feeling anxious, DCM put strength in the stare he was directing at the twins. The questions were completely different from what he was expecting them to be about, and he couldn't expend any more mana. There's no need to talk anymore. That's the end of our conversation. Suddenly, the wall disappeared. He was stunned at the unexpected development, just as he was about to use green chain on the twins. He hesitated for a moment about who he should target. This should probably be your limit. Anyhow, your mana should be reduced by a lot at least. What? DCM was confused by the undead's extremely cold voice. Why could he sense complete calm from him? An incompetent undead who could do nothing but stall for time. He should just command Behemoth to crush him into a pulp. DCM turned his gaze towards the stairs behind the undead. He thought that maybe this attitude was because he had achieved his goal to stall for the arrival of the humans, but he couldn't see anyone coming up the stairs. Even if he concentrated on listening, he couldn't hear any human footsteps or any other footsteps for that matter. He didn't know what the undead thought of his actions just now, but the undead started speaking again. I said your mana should mostly be gone by now. How much longer can you maintain PRI Behemoth? Probably a few more minutes at least, I think. Ah, so that's what this is about. You thought that you could win against me without my mana. Sure, I wasn't able to avoid your punch at the start, but that's because you were summoned suddenly. I could have easily avoided it if I knew you were going to appear. I know. The voice was as cold as it was before. DCM took a gulp unconsciously. Why does he behave like that? Strange. Why was he getting pressured by such a weak undead? He, whose blood came from the one who dominated the world in the past. He, who stood at the pinnacle of the elves as the current strongest elf. DCM gritted his teeth and suppressed the shameful emotions welling up inside his heart. I see it now, he shouted with a thunderous voice. You made me bleed with your fist, so you're thinking that you can win in a physical melee. That punch barely did any damage to me, you see. I know that too. Upon receiving the undead's calm response to his anger-fueled shout, DCM felt an unpleasantness that couldn't be put in words. Maybe he was. Just for a moment, an impossible thought flitted across his mind. Then why? Why did he fight like that? This was a bluff. The enemy was trying to deceive him by acting calm. There's no way it could be anything else. Behemoth. He wasn't sure if that was an angry shout or a scared shriek. Crush him. Let's start then. DCM understood the reason behind the undead's calmness the very next moment. Triplet maximize magic, cacophonous burst release. There was an explosion of sound waves at first, then a pair of angel wings appeared next. A storm of shockwaves hit Behemoth, who stood between DCM and the undead as a rain of light rivaling the downpour from before pierced its body. The elemental guardian of the land's health was being blown away by the second. It didn't bleed or lose parts of its body like a living being, but DCM, as its master, knew Behemoth was standing on its last legs. Confusion. Nothing but confusion. Behemoth was the greatest elemental. No one was on par with it. Even though it received damage in fights until now, they were no more than a few scratches considering its enormous health. And that. Like this. Not once was its health reduced to the verge of death like this. And no way. Well now. I didn't expect that even 6 hits weren't enough to take it down even though I triggered its weakness. Would it have been different if I was more specialized in offensive magic? Just like before, DCM couldn't feel a single emotion from the undead's calm voice. It was like he was a completely different person from the undead before. What the hell is even happening? The confusion welling up in his heart calmed down for a bit, and in its place, fear ran through his body. The fleeting thought from before loomed larger now. That, perhaps, this undead was stronger than him. No. Behemoth. Protect me. Behemoth, upon sensing his thoughts, moved to cover DCM from the undead's sight and brought down its right fist on the enemy. I did it. NN? What? Behemoth followed with a punch from his left hand, meaning that undead wasn't killed in a single hit. Even though he had received 2 hits face on, he saw that the undead still brazenly stood on the other side. He wasn't crushed. Although it had crushed every enemy until now, that undead stood there like it was nothing. Triplet maximize magic, cacophonous burst. In front of DCM's eyes, Behemoth the invincible great elemental turned into a large pile of dirt. He was assaulted by a great sense of. In that instant, something that was inside him had now disappeared without a trace, leaving a gaping hole behind. So it's overkill, but considering you might have some skills up your sleeves, I don't think I made a wrong choice. What do you think? Hi. Impossible. The absolutely invincible elemental, his own shadow. It's impossible for Behemoth to have lost. But it's a fact that it was not standing in front of him right now. Then what should he do? What action should he take? Who the hell was the undead before him? You don't have to be so scared. Reality / He was assaulted by a flood of pain. The kind of pain he never experienced till now. Looking down, he saw that his rain-drenched clothes were now soaked red. Hurts, it hurts. It hurts. It hurts. It hurts. That was the only thing echoing inside his head. I understand the feeling very well. If not for this body, I would have become hysterical from just a single one of those hits before. Well then, I have a proposal. Surrender. I will not cause you any more pain if you do that, and will guarantee your safety afterward. It hurt, really? With tears welling up from the pain, DCM posed the question to the 2 grandchildren. The 2 looked flustered for a moment, and then the granddaughter replied with yes, really. Now we have my master's permission as well. Start removing your gear. Don't fear. I will return them back after confirming if there's anything dangerous with them. Really? I am not lying at all. I will swear it in the names of my masters. Trust me. The undead spoke with a sincere and gentle voice. DCM felt like believing him. It hurts. Mercy of Shoria Robusta was slowly healing the wound, but it didn't take away the pain from the deep, deep wound. Just for a moment, he felt like surrendering if it could take away this pain. But he still had some pride left. As someone who reigned over this country for a long time as its king, he was reluctant to plead for his life from people far younger than himself, even if they were his grandchildren. It hurts. He had no mana left. No, there was some, but he couldn't see himself winning against this undead with the remaining amount. Should he attempt to settle this in a melee? No, first of all, he was not confident in himself right now. He would probably die first if he were to take multiple hits from the undead's spells as strong as the one from before. It hurts. DCM turned his gaze behind the undead towards the stairs. There's no one there. In that case, he should run. That's all he could do. It hurts. It hurts. It hurts. It hurts. Even so, DCM started to run. The blood he left behind was a sign of his declining health. The fear of death welled up in his heart. Even though he had equipped magic items that resisted fear, it couldn't eliminate what was born from inside him. That was why, because he was being urged onward by his fear, his body followed exactly what his mind demanded of it. He kicked the floor with a speed he had never reached until now. His vision of his surroundings blurred as he picked up speed, instantly reducing the distance between him and the undead. Stop! Or I will kill you! He ignored the undead's warning as he passed by him, hearing a tongue click and then a spell being cast. Time stop. He expected more pain from the spell but didn't feel any. No, maybe there was. Perhaps the pain from his deep wound had taken a turn for the worse from him running, to the point where he couldn't even notice any other source of pain even if there was such a thing. So DCM continued to run. The stairs were very close. The pain in his chest was surprisingly strong, but there was no hesitation in his legs. Aura. It seemed like the undead chanted another spell, but once again, this spell didn't affect him either. Then, all he had to do was run. He reached the stairs and the floor under his feet exploded. 3 times at that. His body flew in the air for just a moment, but by wringing the utmost effort out of his body, he managed to keep his posture and continued to flee without reducing his speed even a bit. He didn't feel much pain from his legs. Or rather, he couldn't really feel anything due to the pain in his chest and the overwhelming fear he felt. He felt like the undead was saying something behind him, but he didn't have the composure to hear it. DCM ran like he was flying over the stairs. He couldn't hear anyone chasing him from behind. The moment his tension melted a bit, a fierce pain ran through his legs. DCM nearly cried out by instinct, but suppressed it in a panic. It would be extremely bad to make a loud sound right now. Looking down at his legs, he found them in shreds, probably due to the explosion before. Acknowledging the wounds made his pain that much stronger. DCM looked back the way he ran and saw the trail of blood his escape had made. Even if they were not good at tracking, they could probably follow after him very easily. It hurts. He didn't want to run anymore. But, he was sure there would be more pain waiting for him if he didn't. And most of all, he didn't want to die. With his mind filled with that single conviction, DCM bore the pain and willed his legs into motion. Why do I have to do something like this? Why won't my grandchildren listen to me? He couldn't understand at all. Why won't they cooperate for the sake of the elven race? Damn it all! Shouting silently inside his heart because he was scared of giving his location away by his voice, DCM spat profanities, wiping his tears away as he ran. Ins called for DCM's surrender in the gentlest voice he could muster. Maybe because he couldn't use that strange teleportation technique anymore, or maybe because Ins had succeeded in his attempt to guide the guy's thoughts down a certain path by pushing him to the edge, it looked like he would accept his proposal. Finally, Ins smiled scornfully in his heart. Of course, the proposal was a complete lie. He had no intention of guaranteeing the Elf King's safety. He would be dealt with the moment he took off his equipment. The guy probably wouldn't target the twins anymore with his will broken, but death was the more surefire way. Yet, he felt a fire burning in DCM's eyes the very next moment. DCM suddenly broke into a sprint. Straight towards Ins at that. TCH. Melee? In that case I don't mind at all. Ins hid his smile from his face and instead adopted a voice of surprise and fear. As an arcane-type magic caster, Ins hated fighting in close quarters, so it could be said that the opponent was treading on his weakness. However, the fact that the guy still wanted to fight was a welcome fact for Ins. He would now be able to kill DCM for sure in return for some of his HP. But, what happened next really surprised Ins, so much so that it felt like even his face that couldn't make expressions looked surprised. DCM's trajectory was just a bit off from Ins, and it looked like he didn't intend to reduce his speed either. Ins immediately realized that his predictions were off. Damn it! He is making a break for it. This made his opinions of DCM go up by a level, or maybe not, but it was raised by at least a little. The most troublesome scenario for Ins was the enemy giving his all to escape. Ins would do the same as DCM in a situation like this, although far sooner, before things would reach this point. It was because he understood this, that Ins put many countermeasures in place to prevent the opponent from escaping through magical means like the way he came in. However, he didn't prepare much against him escaping by physical means. There hadn't been enough time to prepare, and it had been difficult to set up the countermeasures in place while trying to hide his true strength. Stop! Or I will kill you! He shouted a warning, but didn't really expect the guy to stop. Plus, it's not like he wouldn't kill him even if he did stop running. Ins immediately started thinking of the next card to play. The opponent could just jump over any walls he made. They would instead obstruct him from seeing the guy's escape, making it more difficult to deal with him. Psychic magic could end this in a single blow, but it's doubtful whether it would work on DCM, who was expected to be over level 70. Skills or items to resist mind control were very easy to obtain in Yggdrasil. It was hard to prepare against every type of mind control magic, but he probably had countermeasures against at least some. Jerkniv had a magic item against being affected by mind control, so to think that DCM wouldn't have any would be idiotic. Personally, he wanted to kill the guy with instant death magic, but considering that he was protected by Mercy of Shoria Robusta, it was meaningless. So, he finally chose Time Stop. This could be resisted as well if he had measures against it, but it should be harder to deal with unless he used a magic item. Time Stop. He didn't stop. DCM didn't stop. Ins didn't click his tongue. He had already thought about this possibility in a corner of his mind. In this case, he only needed to borrow the help of others. He immediately shouted a command. Aura. Yes. Aura knocked an arrow and shadow sewing arrow. Shot an arrow that pierced DCM's shadow, but that too failed at stopping DCM even for a moment. He managed to reach the stairs. Luckily, Ins made the minimum amount of preparations while he was hiding behind the walls of skeleton from before. Explode mine activated under DCM's feet. It's useless. At your feet. DCM ignored him and fled. He could hear footsteps going down the stairs, gradually turning faint. Did he realize I was bluffing? Or was he just not in the mood to listen to anything? He was not knowledgeable enough to use piercing magic against wall-type magic, so I ended up underestimating him. He tried to stop him with a bluff, but it wasn't effective. DCM was a druid. Though from a different system, as a magic caster, it was entirely possible that he saw through Ins's magical traps. Generally, one couldn't cast multiple instances of the same spell at the same time. It's just like how one wouldn't be able to amass a lot of monsters by summoning them repeatedly. Sorry for letting him escape. Upon hearing Aura's apology, Ins turned his gaze from the stairs that DCM had disappeared under to her. No. No, you are right, that skill was a poor choice, Aura. You saw that he had countermeasures against time stop and instant death during that fight. You should have also assumed that he had some countermeasures against crowd control. Ins lifted a hand to stop Aura, who was trying to apologize again. But, I am also at fault for not warning you about it. In fact, I didn't expect him to have measures for crowd control either. That aside, what do you think we should do now? I will chase and kill him. Wait. Ins stopped Aura, who was on the verge of charging out. Considering DCM was probably a druid above level 70, it was highly likely that Ins couldn't overtake him with his speed. Only Aura and Mari could do that. However, in that case, Ins who had exhausted a fair bit of mana would be left alone. I should get some reinforcements from Nazarick through a gate. No, there's not enough time. First, I have to decide if I want to let him escape this time or kill him here. Even with most of his mana exhausted, DCM's physical capabilities were comparatively high. Ins couldn't win in a melee where he wouldn't be able to use his magic. Of course, that's assuming he didn't use Perfect Warrior. Without her beasts, it's possible that Aura may not be able to deal with him if he were to bring out some trump card he might be still holding on to. Maybe I should summon an undead. No, what if he summoned another primal earth elemental? No, no, no. That should be impossible. It would be broken if one could just summon elementals stronger than them multiple times. Even Ins, who specialized in necromancy, couldn't do that. That said, what was impossible to Ins was ultimately according to Yggdrasil's standards, and it was entirely possible that those rules didn't apply to this world. Even though his game knowledge had been applicable till now, DCM's command of that elemental was impossible by the game's logic. In that case, Mari. Why yes. It's probably going to be dangerous, but you will have to kill that DCM by your strength alone. You are wearing different gear than usual, so don't be careless. If you feel like you can't win, conserve your mana and stall for time. Ins wanted to give him more directions, but he couldn't waste any more time. Go. Yes. Mari gave an unusually energetic reply and started racing down the stairs, following after DCM. He was fast as Ins had expected, his steps already becoming fainter by the second. Seeing him run alone, Ins wanted to summon an undead to go after Mari as support, but decided to hold it back so that they could use it as a shield if there was an emergency. In any case, Lopsided Duel was still active. Maybe he could use the undead to quickly deal with him if he had to fight that king again. Aura. You will be guarding me. Let's go through the treasury as quickly as possible and get everything. We will then regroup with Mari right after. Okay. End of Part 2b.